Hey folks, David Stewart here. It's time to talk a little bit more about fandom and identity, something I've talked about in the past, particularly as it relates to Star Wars. I think Star Wars is a very special case of this. It used to be Star Trek was the big one for this, but I think Star Wars has supplanted it. I want to take a look at a tweet. This is a tweet that had been showing up on my timeline a bunch over the last couple days, and it's a great entry point into what I want to talk about today. Now, before I get into it, this guy, Ed Powell, don't dogpile him or anything. I'm sure he's a nice guy. There's nothing wrong with him, and there's nothing really wrong with him thinking along these lines, but I'll demonstrate the problems with what actually he's saying here. So he's probably just a normal guy. He likes history, politics, Tolkien, and cats, and he has a PhD in astrophysics. So probably a smart guy too. Well, let's take a look. Seeing the Star Wars movies does not make you a Star Wars fan. Actual Star Wars fans have done some of the following. Read the novelizations. That's the novels that are made out of the movies. Read the books in the EU, Extended Universe. Read the new canon books. Those are the ones post-Disney. Read some comics, watched the animated shows, and participated in Star Wars discussion groups. Now, if you're thinking, I haven't done a lot of those things and I consider myself a Star Wars fan, it's okay. This comment section is a Star Wars discussion group, so you can hop down there and have some discussions with some other people and get your Star Wars fan membership card. Most of the reactions to this have been kind of along those lines. How dare you say what can and can't be a Star Wars fan? I cosplay as a stormtrooper. I think I'm a Star Wars fan. Or I played all the games. What about playing the games? I'm a Star Wars fan. I don't want to read the crappy new canon books. They suck. I still want to be a Star Wars fan. That's not quite what I want to dig into past this, but those are all valid responses to this. Really what I want to talk about is the idea of a created identity. And Star Wars fan, as we saw on that list, is an example of a created identity. What is a created identity? Well, first we have to think of what I'm talking about by identity. Identity is group membership in this context. So if you're a membership of an ethnic group, which is a classic form of identity, you're either part of that group or not. It's actually not really up to you. You're descended, if you're Basque, it's because you're descended from Basque people. Your parents are Basque. Therefore, you are Basque. And if you're not descended from Basque people, you're not Basque. It's a really, really simple thing when it comes to ethnic identity. And the only gray areas would be, say, people of mixed race or mixed ethnicities, that their ancestry is not as strong in that direction. Like I'm a quarter Cherokee, so my grandmother was Cherokee, but it's not like I spend time with Cherokee tribal stuff. I have no interaction with it. So I've never bothered to say, well, I'm Cherokee. It's just like I have some Native American ancestry, like a lot of people. So that doesn't really, maybe it's like a gray area, but for me, it doesn't really qualify. It's a little bit different though when we're talking about a created identity. A created identity is for aspects about yourself that are, unlike ethnicity, which is immutable, are variable and up to your decision. So a good example of a created identity would be any kind of club membership, but really like a religion. If you're a Christian, that's a bit of a created identity. You take on and you put upon yourself the identity of I am a Christian. That is something you identify yourself as. Well, what makes you a Christian? You weren't born a Christian. You become a Christian when you join the church. So if you're looking at the Catholic Church, if you've been baptized and confirmed in the church, then you're a membership of the Catholic Church and you are Catholic. That membership doesn't go away if you are not as heavily interacting with your faith maybe as others. No one would say, well, you stopped being Catholic because you didn't go to church as much as somebody else. Even if you interact with it mildly and still hold yourself as a Catholic, you pretty much get to keep that identity. And when we see Star Wars fans, we can see with a list like this, we're kind of creating a bit of an imitation or a mockery of a religion as far as how you identify it. Because if you think about how are you going to identify other Christians, you probably have a list of things like acknowledge and proclaim that Christ is the Son of God, that he died and then he rose again. Obviously, if somebody doesn't believe that, they're not a Christian, and if they're not proclaiming it, you can't really say that they're a Christian. You also have probably some other lists on there, like they go to church, maybe they give alms to the poor, pray to God, study the Bible. Those are all things that you use to help identify a Christian. That's basically what we have with this little Star Wars list, is a list of things to help you identify other Star Wars fans, both to say, I'm a Star Wars fan because I meet these requirements, as well as identify other Star Wars fans. Now, the thing about this created identity is that it's fundamentally different from a religion, because a religion is passed down. It's not really up to you what the religion means, right? You don't get to decide that the Nicene Creed is out and you get to put a new creed in. That's not really up to you. You've inherited the traditions of the church. Even if you're part of a Protestant denomination that's fairly new, you're still inheriting a large portion of your traditions and your beliefs from prior generations. And it's not really up to you whether, what those defining factors are going to be. With Star Wars fans, however, as this list demonstrates, it's something that is kind of up for negotiation, because it's really created out of whole cloth. It's a new thing. It's not something passed down from generations prior. It's something that you have to define in the here and now. Now, the thing about an identity is, one of the most important things about creating identity, personal identity, is the idea of the self and the other, or the in-group and the out-group. So the self identity and others who are not that identity, regardless of what that identity is. Which that means you have to create a limit. If you were just going to say, oh, people are Star Wars fans if they've watched the movies, we have a problem, because there's been 300 million Americans or something who've seen Star Wars. There's been 1 billion people worldwide who've seen a Star Wars movie. And if you were to say, well, maybe you start to have to narrow it down. They have to have seen all the movies. Well, now you're only down to like 500 million people, right? You have to make it much narrower in order to create an in-group. An in-group, by definition, can't be everybody, so you have to cut it down. So that's the point of the list, is to say it's not enough to watch the movies. Anyone can watch. Everyone's watched the movies. That's like saying, you have an identity called human being. So we're going to narrow it down. You have to have read some novels and you have to be interacting with other media outside of Star Wars, outside of Star Wars movies, which is related to Star Wars. And if you're not consuming enough corporate product, by golly, you are not a membership of the Identity Club. That brings me to my final point, which is, when Disney bought the Star Wars franchise, they weren't buying the stories. They didn't buy them because they cared about George Lucas's stories. They didn't buy them because they cared about Ralph McQuarrie's visual design. They didn't buy them because they cared about the actor's performance or they cared about preserving the films. They bought them because Star Wars fans were attached to Star Wars. What they did, in fact, was buy, for $4.5 billion, a group of dedicated fans that really love Star Wars. Fans that, kind of like this list, will buy a lot of products that are related to Star Wars. I talked about this with the long tail of Star Wars fandom. A really dedicated Star Wars fan may have a $100,000 Star Wars collection. That's an extremely valuable member of your club, and you don't want to alienate them. That's really what they wanted. They wanted people who have like a religious adherence to being a Star Wars fan. They're going to not just tithe, but give extra money to them. But the big difference between a church, which if you give alms to the church and they spend it on charity, when you give alms to Disney, they spend it on private yachts and planes and whatever else the corporate stockholders and executives are going to spend their money on. It's not a charitable organization. This is not a religion that's dedicated to saving people from the fires of hell or improving their life and teaching them deep spiritual understanding and theology. This is a fake religion created by people who need an identity outside of themselves because of some other problem with needing identity, I guess maybe we all need identity, and if you have a little bit of a lack of an identity, you have to create one. That's what they wanted. They wanted $4.5 billion to buy the equivalent of a secular religion, and it's apparent to me when you see all this toxic fan backlash that they get rather upset when the fans that they bought don't want to buy the crap that they're shoveling at them, that they aren't faithfully buying all of the products like the new canon books and the comic books and that kind of stuff, that they're withholding their dollars from them. Darn it, you were supposed to be people that gave us lots of money for this investment. So anyway, that's it for me. Leave me your thoughts down below on fanship as an identity, and I will see you guys next time. Don't forget, by the way, to hop on my mailing list, deviouspress.com/list. See you guys next time.